This week's menu items came at the request of Simmering Soup Pot from Reddit. Thank you so much for the kind words, and I hope you enjoy the video. Order in! Orders up, service please. For our Paru cakes, into a large mixing bowl we add 1 cup or 130 grams of all-purpose flour, 2 tablespoons or 24 grams of white sugar, 1 teaspoon or 5 grams of baking powder, and 1 gram of fine sea salt before whisking to combine. Next, into the mixing bowl we'll add 1 cup or 250 ml of coconut milk and crack in 1 large egg. We'll mix that together until everything is nearly combined before adding in 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 2 tablespoons or 28 grams of melted unsalted butter. Everything is then whisked together until just combined. It's fine for lumps to remain in the batter because it's more important to not overwork the gluten, as this will result in a gummy texture once the Paru cakes are cooked. Moving over to the stove, we'll heat a non-stick frying pan over medium heat and spread around 1 teaspoon worth of butter with some paper towel. When the butter is melted and begins to foam slightly, we're going to add in 1/3 of a cup of the batter and cook the Paru cake for roughly 2 minutes or until golden brown on the bottom. Now in the show, mine says to look for bubbles that appear on the surface of the Paru cake as an indicator for when it's time to flip. However, because this batter is quite thick, it's better to keep an eye on the colour of the base first because it's a much better indicator of when it's time to flip, and you can use the bubbles as a secondary indicator. Either way, once the bottom of the Paru cake is a lovely golden brown, we're going to give it a flip and continue to cook for an additional 2 minutes or until the other side is also a nice golden brown. Once the Paru cake is cooked and well browned on both sides, we'll transfer it over to a plate and keep it warm in a low heat oven. Then from this point we'll simply clean out the pan of any scraps before repeating the cooking process with our remaining batter to complete our Paru cake stack. While we're cooking this second Paru cake, I do want to address that yes, in the show they use the pulp from the Paru fruit to make the cakes rather than the milk. Unfortunately, all my local grocery stores were out of stock of coconut flour for whatever reason, which is why I've opted to use coconut milk instead. If you want to be more accurate to the show, you could absolutely use your favourite pancake recipe and substitute the flour for coconut flour, but do keep in mind that coconut flour absorbs quite a bit of liquid, so you may need to add a little bit more milk until you achieve your desired consistency for the Paru cake batter. Whether you decide to use coconut milk or coconut flour, here you have a very simple but delicious stack of Paru cakes from Ascendance of a Bookworm. Now as for the taste of these Paru cakes, it's exactly what you'd expect. These are simple coconut milk pancakes and they are absolutely delicious. You've got that beautifully soft and fluffy texture with a moist crumb thanks to the fattiness of the coconut milk. They've got just the right amount of sweetness so they can be eaten plain, and the coconut milk provides a very pleasant coconut flavour which is enhanced by the addition of vanilla. Of course, if you wanted to, you could also eat these with all of your favourite pancake toppings, mine being good old maple syrup, because yes, I'm a basic bitch when it comes to pancakes. Don't at me. These Paru cakes are a great way to experience classic pancakes with a new flavour twist, and I'd highly recommend trying these out for yourself at home. But now, let's move on to making some pound cake. So to start off our pound cake batter, we're going to need 225 grams of unsalted butter, softened to room temperature. This means you can press into the butter and make an indent, but it will still hold its form. Now we're going to cut this butter up into smaller pieces before placing it into the bowl of a stand mixer. Don't throw away the butter wrapper either, because it's important for later. Next we turn on the stand mixer onto medium speed and beat the butter until it becomes light, fluffy and creamy, which takes around 5 to 7 minutes. Halfway through the beating process we'll scrape down the sides of the bowl to ensure that all the butter is being mixed evenly. While the butter continues to beat away in the mixer, we're going to double sift 195 grams of all-purpose flour into a separate bowl to remove any lumps before setting it to one side. While I'm sifting the flour, I'd like to mention at this point that for this recipe, much like the Paru cake recipe, this is going to be my take of the pound cake that was made in the show rather than a direct replication. The main reason for this being that traditional pound cake recipes used an entire pound each of flour, eggs, butter and sugar, which is perfectly fine, but that makes a lot of cake. And in Anime Kitchen, we try to be mindful of food wastage, which is why we're making a smaller batch of cake today. Either way, once the butter is creamy and fluffy and looks something like this, we need to introduce 225 grams of sugar and 2 grams of salt into the butter. To do this, we'll once again set the mixer to medium speed, and as it's beating, we'll pour in the combined sugar and salt into the bowl in a slow and steady stream. Once all the sugar and salt has been added, we'll let this mix for an additional 2 to 3 minutes, making sure to scrape down the bowl halfway through to ensure all the sugar is being creamed together with the butter. Once everything in the bowl looks nice and creamy, we'll start adding in 1 large egg at a time and allow that to mix for roughly 30 seconds or until it's just incorporated. Then we'll scrape down the sides of the bowl before repeating this process of beating and scraping down with the remaining 3 eggs. When we're at the point of adding in the final egg, we'll also add in 2 teaspoons or 10 ml of vanilla extract. Once all the eggs have been incorporated into the butter, we can remove the bowl from the stand mixer and set the mixer to one side. Going back to our flour, we're going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder and mix these together before adding roughly 1/4 of the flour mixture into the mixing bowl. From this point, we use a rubber spatula to gently fold the flour into the eggy, sugary butter mixture until no dry streaks of flour remain. Once that has been achieved, we're going to repeat this process 3 more times until all of the flour has been delicately folded into the batter. Now, if you see that there are still little lumps of butter that haven't been completely beaten into the cake batter, it's not the end of the world as they'll just melt away once the cake goes into the oven anyway, so no stress. Once the cake batter is thick and homogeneous, set it to one side and we can focus on preparing our cake tin. In this show, it looks like mine baked pound cake in a round, so we're using a 20cm springform cake tin today. I'm not a real fan of this, but we'll get into that later. Now, here's a little baking tip for you. The butter wrapper that we saved from earlier still has leftover bits of butter on it, which makes it perfect for greasing the bottom and sides of your pan without getting your hands all oily. So once we've coated the pan liberally in butter, we're going to add in a large pinch of all-purpose flour to the base, and then we're going to continually turn the cake around and ensure that the base and sides are completely coated in flour. Now that our cake tin has been prepared with the flour and the butter, we can pour in our cake batter and spread it out in a nice and even layer using the spatula. Give the pan a gentle shake to help with leveling it out, and then we're going to place the cake into an oven preheated to 170 degrees Celsius for 40 minutes. After 40 minutes, you'll want to rotate the cake around and continue to bake for an additional 20 minutes. 1 hour later and our pound cake is out of the oven, and when a cake tester is inserted and removed, it's free of crumbs, so we know it's cooked. And now let's get into why I didn't recommend using a round cake tin. You can see that while the cake isn't burnt, it's definitely a lot darker than what you would expect from a pound cake. Pound cakes are quite dense. Using something like a loaf pan or a bundt cake is what you normally use for a pound cake because they either have less surface area or they are shaped in a way that helps to distribute the heat more evenly, which is ideal for dense cake batters. Using a round cake tin like I have here runs the risk of the cake drying out during the baking process or browning too quickly because there's too much surface area. So unless you're aiming to recreate this pound cake for visual show accuracy like I am, I'd recommend using a 10 by 20 cm loaf tin, a bundt cake tin, or possibly a smaller round tin to avoid over browning your pound cake like I've done here. But at least by seeing what I've done, you won't have to go through this experience. With all that being said, we're going to let the cake cool for 10 to 15 minutes in the pan before running a knife around the edges to release the cake, and then we're going to transfer this over to a wire rack to cool further. Once the cake is cooled down but is still warm, we'll transfer it over to a serving plate before cutting ourselves a slice. As you can see, using a round cake tin has given us quite a dark outer crust, and the crumb of this cake, while characteristically dense for a pound cake, may be slightly drier than desired. So do yourselves a favour and use a loaf tin instead. With all of that being said, here is your order of pound cake from Ascendance of a Bookworm. Alright, now let's give this pound cake a taste. So regardless of all the warnings and other recommendations that I made throughout this recipe, I have to admit that this pound cake still turned out really well. While it is a little on the dry side, it has a great level of sweetness that makes it enjoyable without being sickly, and the dryness could definitely be avoided by using a more appropriate cake tin. The darkened crust around the cake provides both a great contrast with a firmer, crisper texture and an almost caramel-like flavour addition to the cake. While it may be a little rough around the edges, pair this cake with a nice cup of coffee or black tea and it'd be very easy to take down a couple of slices. As always my friends, thank you so much for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please let me know by dropping a like down below, and let me know in the comments what food from anime and other media you'd like to see me recreate in the future. Subscribe to the channel for a new menu item every single week, and until then, pull up a chair, unfurl that napkin, and I'll see you in the anime kitchen. Cheers.